Our special guest today is Rabbi Daniel Cohen. Rabbi Cohen is a popular motivator, mentor, and inspirational speaker. His unique blend of authenticity, humor, wisdom, and insight has helped many others to better navigate contemporary society and lead lives of legacy. He has served in the rabbinate for more than 30 years. Rabbi Cohen is author of What Will They Say About You When You Are Gone? Creating a Life of Legacy, and the newly released book, The Secret of the Light. Engaging in hundreds of end-of-life conversations and delivering thousands of eulogies provide him with a unique perspective on the essence of a meaningful life. As a result, Rabbi Cohen is a sought-after national speaker on leading a life of legacy. He's also the co-host with Reverend Greg Dahl of the nationally syndicated radio show, The Rabbi and the Reverend. And, here's the part I love, he enjoys doing magic shows, playing sports, writing, searching for God, and living life with joy and an ever-present smile. Rabbi Daniel Cohen, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you very much. It's so wonderful to be here, especially a fellow guy from Connecticut.
We're neighbors in Stamford, so I appreciate you taking the time. But ironically enough, you're not in Stamford today, but we'll get to that in a few minutes.
Yep.
Rabbi, America was founded as a beacon of hope, justice, freedom, and good, and yet there's been a noticeable rise in anti-Semitism in this country in recent years. That's been evidenced by an increase in violent attacks, hate speech, and vandalism targeting Jewish communities and institutions. Is America still living up to its historical role of being a beacon of good today?
So first of all, I'm a big believer. My grandmother immigrated, as most of my grandparents did actually, from Europe. And one of the things they always talk to me is about the Statue of Liberty, the blessings of our country. When it was the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty, my grandmother got for all of the grandkids little coins. She wrote letters saying, "Give me, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry." And I believe that America has been a beacon, and God willing will continue to be a beacon of freedom, liberty. I'm actually, as you noted before, in D.C., and I was just at the memorial for Thomas Jefferson, and just thinking about the underlying Judeo-Christian values and what our country has to offer. That doesn't mean, of course, that every country is perfect, and that doesn't mean when we can't continue to aspire to those values. I do believe that the diminishment of faith in our country has led in many ways to a rise in bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, which unfortunately continues to emerge. But I do think we haven't lost hope, and I haven't, in what America is all about. And we have to continue to fight for those values and really do what we can to see the face of God in every human being. In America, certainly, I believe, is a place where we can still do that, and God willing, we'll do more so in the days ahead.
As a follow-up to that, with our widening political and social divisions, does America risk losing its moral standing in the global community and its moral compass here at home?
Look, I think that when you think about what America has to offer to the world, and again, the values, I mean, this notion that, look, we are, and we don't say it enough, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we have to continue to aspire to that and affirm that. I think America has been a leader over the past 200 years. I think in many ways, America needs to not diminish its role. We're living in a time which is more dangerous than ever, where we have a lot of nefarious actors that are trying to really bring the world into a more negative place. But I think that, while we have to examine our mistakes, we can't shirk our responsibility to continue to mine the values that our country was founded on, and also continue to think about what it means to be a country that is united under one God. And that means that regardless of a person's economic status, regardless of a person's race, creed, or culture or faith, we believe in the inalienable rights of every human being to freedom and to the pursuit of happiness. So, again, as I said, I haven't lost faith in it. And I think that it's important to try to, move forward. We can beat ourselves up, but that doesn't accomplish anything. Have time for self-reflection and then try to move forward.
America, as we know, has been a refuge for persecuted peoples. You mentioned your grandparents coming over here. You talked about the Statue of Liberty. I love that story where, it says, "Give me, you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore." So we opened our arms again, for those persecuted. But at the same time, America has its own history of slavery, discrimination, and ongoing inequality. How can we reconcile America as a moral beacon with those deep flaws?
So I think when you think about, look, at the time when America was founded, unfortunately, there was, we are living, I think, in the broader scheme of things. If you look at world history over the past 2,000 years, we're living at a time of greater economic freedom, and greater uplift for more people in the world than ever before. Does that mean that part of that journey and part of that process, there wasn't slavery? There was. I mean, the reality is in other countries, there also was as well. America was not exceptional in that case. But I also think that with the Civil War and with the civil rights movements and with, fighting for freedom and welcoming people who are being persecuted to our shores, overall, America has been a strong beacon. And I think it's important also to really try to encourage people, regardless of how they were born or what community they were born into, not to see themselves as victims. The reality is that each person is empowered with choosing freedom. Viktor Frankl, who I'm a big fan of in Man's Search for Meaning, says what cannot be taken from a person is the choices they make given the circumstances that they are in. And everybody, again, we do believe in the value, and I believe in the value of one of my mentors, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a great Jewish philosopher. He said, "I believe in capitalism with a conscience." So I believe that everybody needs to do the best that they can to economically do better. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have safety nets. Of course, we should have safety nets, but we also don't want people to feel tied to those. We want to recognize that everybody does have unique talents, and together, hopefully, everybody can rise. And I think we've seen it happen in our country. I think that, God willing, we'll see more of that. And I think, yes, we've had our challenges over the past 200 years, but overall, with everyone's support, America has certainly been a fertile ground for people really to rise above the challenges that they may have been born into, to be able to achieve great things in their life.
As we look specifically at the current rise in anti-Semitism in America, how does it compare to previous periods in American history? Are there any parallels or key differences?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, we were very blessed for a number of decades, really, in America. I mean, take, for example, anti-Semitism, which has been, unfortunately, a plague for the Jewish people for hundreds of years. But I do think that, again, going back to what I said before, when generally faith is strong in a country and people recognize the Judeo-Christian values that America is on, there's a sense that, you know what? Every human being is created in God's image. Whether I go to church, synagogue, or a mosque on Sunday, the reality is I need to see the sparks of holiness in everybody. But what has happened in our country, again, going back to this, is that with the separation, which I think is important, of course, of church and state, but the diminishment of faith, there's been a virus that has emerged, which is really, again, looking at people not for who they are internally, but again, for the color of their skin. There's scapegoating, there's racism. But I think we can, turn the tide. And I would say, look, there was a lot of sympathy that was generated for the Jewish people after the Holocaust. I mean, clearly, the Jewish people were tremendously persecuted. And I would say there was a time when there was real acceptance, and there has been, of the Jewish people within mainstream society. Yet, unfortunately, again, this virus has emerged a little bit, certainly tied a little bit to what's going on in Israel. But I think we cannot allow what's happening today a little bit too frequently to happen. It's not America. America is not a place that has ever. America is a place that accepts people for who they are, that values citizens regardless of their faith, creed, or culture, that really celebrates what unites us, not what divides us. And I think we have to reclaim that history within America, and God willing, that destiny as well.
How has the rise in anti-Semitism affected the way Jewish Americans live their daily lives? My son plays basketball at our local Jewish community center. Every time we go in for practice or a game, there's an armed guard outside, and I'm Christian. I can't imagine what it's like as part of that being my everyday life.
Look, I mean, I would say there's definitely been a shift. I mean, when I first started in the rabbinate in Stamford, Connecticut, people would just walk in the building. I mean, there was no security that was there. Other than on the high holidays, you just walked in. But unfortunately, it's not only anti-Semitism. I mean, there's been a rise in violence in general in America, and that is really tragic. We see it all the time. We don't need to go through it. And I think there's a recognition that we need to offer more security. At the same time, I'll take Stanford, for example. I don't think people in Stanford walk around in fear. People walk around wearing their Star of David publicly, wearing a yarmulke publicly. Thank God we have the majority of people, I believe, are law-abiding people, good people out there. But I would say, again, it's a little unnerving that we have to live in a society where we do have to have so much security. So I think overall it hasn't changed it. Look, one thing I would say, it brings people back to their Jewish identity a little bit. Unfortunately, when people are being persecuted or are, to a certain degree, there's a rise in anti-Semitism, people are asking themselves the question, if I am being targeted for being a Jew, maybe I should find out a little more what it means to be a Jew if I'm going to be targeted. So I've seen people come back to their faith a little bit more. I'll share an anecdote with you. I was in Washington a number of months ago. It was the first ever Christian-Jewish alliance lobbying on Capitol Hill for Israel. And there were many Christian Zionists that came to support Israel. And one of them was from an organization in upstate New York in Buffalo called Eagle's Wings. And I said to him, what motivated you to be a Christian Zionist? So he said to me that he started at a church in Massachusetts, and he wanted to connect with the Jewish community. So somebody said, why don't you do an event to support Israel? So he did a night to support Israel. The morning after the event, somebody threw a rock into his church and broke the glass to basically protest the fact that he was supporting Israel. And he literally said, if somebody hates Israel that much that they're going to break a glass on the morning after a church has had a event to support Israel, I need to understand what's worth fighting for. I need to understand what makes Israel so supportive. He flew to Israel. He understood a little more of why Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. He got more connected with the Bible that says those who bless you will be blessed and those who curse you will be cursed. And it led to a whole new pathway in his life to be a religious Zionist.
I've been especially concerned about the aggressive surge in anti-Semitism speech and violence on college campuses across the country since last October 7th. In many interviews, protesters don't even know the history or the facts behind the conflict and either don't understand or really just don't seem to care about the meaning of the phrase "from the river to the sea" when they use it. I understand the motivation of many Arab Americans, but what's driving the involvement of uninformed young people who have joined that cause?
So I think that there's oftentimes a way too simplistic understanding that young people have, and in general, which is oppressed, oppressor, numbers, and just looking at things without any sense of moral bearing. The reality is that unfortunately, there were many innocent lives that have been lost, thousands in Gaza. But the reality is the blame is to be laid at Hamas. On October 6th, for example, Israel was doing its thing. Arabs are doing its thing. People need to remember the history here. The Jews were forcibly evacuated from Gaza to give a opportunity for that area to build an economically viable place. Hamas, though, unfortunately, instead of investing millions, if not billions of dollars in infrastructure to create an economically viable place, they invested in tunnels and invested in terror. And Hamas has absolutely no interest in innocent Palestinians. They're hiding, Jews will use missiles to protect their civilians. Hamas will use civilians to protect their missiles. So for somebody who doesn't understand the broad thing, they'll see, well, 50,000 Gazans died. It's tragic. But as I've always said, if Israel put down its weapons, Hamas would destroy Israel. If Hamas put down its weapons, there would be peace. And I think, unfortunately, we're living in a world of sound bites, living in a world of simplistic equations. But again, Hamas beheaded, raped, threw babies in ovens and burned them alive on October 7th. That didn't have to happen. There's still hostages that are there. If Hamas right now said we'll return the hostages, we'll put down our weapons, let's focus on living together in the Abrahamic vision of what the UAE did. Let's build a better life for future generations. I think it's possible. But unfortunately, there's been a generational indoctrination. It's happened on our college campuses as well. And we have to, work very hard to combat that. I've not lost faith, and neither have many people, in the possibility of light overwhelming darkness, in living in a world where we can truly live side by side in peace.
You mentioned the indoctrination on college campuses. Is what's happening on these campuses a preview of a fight for Western values?
100%. And anybody that thinks that this is only against Israel is naive. I mean, they're burning not only Israeli flags, but they're burning American flags. I mean, to me, it's really tragic when people come to monuments in our country and put a keffiyeh on it and deface it. I mean, again, this is not America. I don't think it represents a large group, but I think it represents a group that really needs to be held in check and say, this is not who we are. I mean, the reality is that, of course, America welcomes immigrants. It should. But if you're going to be here, you need to also embody the values of what America stands for. And that's not the values that America stands for.
In your view, what should colleges and universities be doing to combat anti-Semitism while still protecting free speech?
So I think that, again, this is something I've talked to, governmental leaders about it. I had a fruitful conversation with Senator Blumenthal, who's a close friend, who's the senator in Connecticut, about it. We believe in free speech. At the same time, we don't believe in free speech that is genocidal. The reality is that when somebody says from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, that's a call for the eradication of the Jewish people in Israel. Anybody that says that I'm against Zionism, but I'm not an anti-Semite, doesn't understand the connection of Zionism to Judaism. If somebody who's a Jew and says I'm not a Zionist, they're actually a heretic. The basis of Judaism is a belief in a homeland. And I think that, again, people have a right to free speech, but not to call for the eradication of a people, eradication of a state. Obviously, people can disagree with policies in Israel. But the other thing is that the college campuses certainly have to clamp down on the way that, unfortunately, some of these rallies have gotten out of hand, where they prevent Jews, like in UCLA or different places. There should be no Jew-free zones. God forbid if somebody said there should be a black-free zone or a gay-free zone on campus, there will be outrage. Same thing can't happen to the Jewish people either. So I think we're at a pivotal moment. And I think if we, again, stand strong and understand, again, what the values are of our country, there are, by the way, universities that have stood strong, and they're dealing with it. And I think we shouldn't have universities that are afraid of the masses. It should never be that the inmates are running the asylum. Not that I'm calling university asylums, of course, but the point is they're good. Anyway, you get what I'm saying.
I absolutely get it. Absolutely get it. So in the bigger picture, social media has made it so much easier to spread anti-Semitic ideas. Are we simply going to have to accept that's the way things are going to be from now on? Or do you believe there can be an effective way to use social media to combat online hate and misinformation?
I definitely think there can be a way to combat things in our society. Look, social media actually is both a blessing and a curse, because the reality is that social media is been a way to connect people, to inspire people. And I think that it connects people also around very positive ideas as well. And whether those ideas, I'll give you an example. We did something in Stanford, we continue to do, which is called the Elijah Moment campaign, which is basically inspiring people to do flash mobs of kindness. It really emanates from the book that we'll talk about a little bit later. But imagine, for example, using social media to say, you know what, there's a person here who needs something. Let's all support this organization. Let's all get engaged. Look, so I think that social media has been dangerous because people can hide behind anonymity. They can spread lies. They can spread anti-Semitic conspiracies. But at the same time, I would say I'd rather go with responsible social media than not have it at all.
How can we better understand and confront anti-Semitism in all its forms, whether it's coming from the far right or the far left? And what can non-Jews do to be better allies to the Jewish community during this troubling rise in anti-Semitism?
So I think that, first of all, I appreciate this question a lot. We're kindred spirits, and, regardless of what our faith is, reality is we want to create a better society. So I think that one of the ways to help is to reach out to the Jewish community, to reach out to synagogues, let them know you're thinking about them. Maybe it's support for Israel in different ways. I think also, and this is important, the more friendships we create, the more bridges we create among communities, we really understand that there's so much more in common than not. I've said this actually with one of my close friends is Reverend Greg Dahl, who is the head of the Norotan Presbyterian Church in Darien, and just bringing together around, the community around good works. It's hard to hate somebody who's a friend of yours, who's somebody that you know. So I think saying to the leaders of your faith communities, why don't we do an event with the Jewish community? Why don't we help the homeless, in our community? Why don't we help, single moms, whatever that is? I think that would be a big help. I also think that visits to Israel are important. I've done, visits with, interfaith groups and going. There's nothing like meeting Israelis, appreciating, what the homeland is all about is also a wonderful way to connect. We oftentimes think that our country is defined by the extremes. The reality is a very large swath of center people who aren't left, who aren't extreme right, who really want to come together around the values that we actually all share. So I think there are a lot of pathways forward for that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've always said that America is really like a bell curve. And you've got the 10% in the far left, the 10% in the far right, and 80% are in the middle who will agree to disagree. So I completely appreciate your viewpoint on that. Are there specific books or websites you would recommend for our listeners if they wanted to go to learn more about the history of Judaism?
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, I would recommend something called Stand With Us, which is a great website that actually focuses on combating anti-Semitism and support for Israel. So that's another great one. Another one is called AISH, AISH.com. If you want to learn more about Judaism, it's actually based in Jerusalem. They have a wonderful website all about the holidays, about principles of Jewish faith. And it's a great website as well. And people can always reach out to me. As I think we're going to talk about, I put together a podcast with a friend of mine called Judaism in the 21st Century, but I'll let you talk about that, which is a great entry point as well.
Rabbi, many times we think we understand a different religion because we have a 30,000 foot perspective, but we really don't understand it. Or even worse, what we think we know is completely wrong. For those unfamiliar with Judaism, what does it mean to be Jewish? Is it a religious identity, an ethnic identity, or both?
So first of all, I would say primarily it's a religious identity. Clearly there's ethnicity to it, but at the same time, when you go back to the roots of Judaism, you look in the Bible, and I'll even go back. Initially, I'm going to give you like a very quick history lesson. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
Good, bring it on. So in the beginning, literally, in the book of Genesis, God's goal in creating humanity, Adam and Eve were not Jewish. The idea is God wants a relationship with humanity. The greatest pleasure we can have in life is to feel a connection to God and our souls, and realize that life has meaning, life has purpose. Adam and Eve, unfortunately, distanced themselves from God with the sin in the Garden of Eden. And then God tasks Adam and Eve are out of the Garden of Eden. Unfortunately, then, the humanity descends into a time of violence and hate and murder, and that leads to the generation of the flood. After the generation of the flood, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, God gives the children of Noah 7 Noahide laws. You can actually look it up. There are people that are called Noahides. Noahides are people that abide by 7 principles, which basically help them lead a life which is rooted in ethical monotheism and justice. After that time, then people descended into still denying God's presence. That's where you have the famous story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel. God finally, again, you don't say God decides because God is omniscient, but basically he tasks Abraham and Sarah with a mission. That mission is to go to the land of Israel and develop a society that is rooted in ethical monotheism, righteousness, and justice that will then serve as a source of blessing to the world. And the essence of being a Jew is to be a light unto the nations. And God gave the Jewish people at Mount Sinai not only the 10 Commandments, but 613, the Torah as we know it, as a way to fuel our faith and be true to a purpose, which is really leading a life which is rooted in godliness, in seeing the godliness in every human being, in leading a life of integrity, honesty, goodness, kindness. And being a Jew means embracing that mission. Being the chosen people doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else. Judaism believes that you don't have to be Jewish to be a righteous person. It just means we have a mission, which is to be the bearer of God's light in the world and hopefully inspire the entire world to lead a godly life.
And what are some of the most common misconceptions about Judaism that you encounter, and how can we dispel them?
So, it's interesting. I think that, maybe going back to what I said, I mean, Judaism is not a religion that believes in isolating itself. Judaism is a belief in elevating. And there's a basic difference. Sometimes people see Jewish people that are insular. In the end of the day, God says to Abraham these words: you are a stranger and a citizen in the world. Stranger means you may eat different foods, you have different codes within certain holidays and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're a citizen of the world. You're supposed to be engaged in finding cures to diseases, in harnessing technology to improve people's lives, in really trying to be a blessing to the world around you. That's a major message of what it means to be a Jewish people. And I think sometimes people perceive Jews not necessarily in that universalistic covenant, but that's part of what we're here to do as well. Look, I think that there's a lot. Thomas Cahill wrote a book called The Gift of the Jews. And if you think about it, everybody needs a Sabbath. Whether or not you're Jewish or not, wouldn't it be great, Chris, if 25 hours every week you turned off your phone and just focused on the people around you? That's part of what Judaism offers. It says, you know what? Turn off the outside world to tune into your inner world. Regardless of our faith, we are most joyous in life when we live. There's a great rabbi, his name is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He said, live life with radical amazement. Everything is wondrous. Everything is beautiful. And the reality is that, life is not meant to be a highlight film. Sometimes when we have a brush with our mortality, we get really excited, but Judaism is there to cultivate consistent joy and a sense of really appreciating the relationships that we have.
Radical amazement. I love that. You typically don't hear the word radical in something positive,
Yes,
So I
exactly.
appreciate you sharing that. We seem to hear a lot about the Muslims' Sharia law, but there's also Jewish law. What is the role of halakha in the everyday lives of Jews, and how does it shape moral and ethical decision making in the Jewish community?
So, Judaism again goes back to what I said before. The word halacha is Jewish law, but Jewish law was never meant to be, penal to remove people from society. There's no obligation for you, who is somebody who's not Jewish, to abide by halacha. But the idea for halacha was meant to be a guidepost for all of us, certainly within the Jewish community, to be very true to the values of Judaism. And I'll give you an example. Judaism has a lot of laws around the notion of business ethics, for example, honest weights and measures, paying people on time, caring for the poor, ensuring that you don't take revenge. The notion of, again, that is something that we think about a lot in terms of, I'll give you another example. You know, Society believes in finders, keepers, losers, weepers. Judaism has a very strong ethic when it comes to returning lost objects, restoring property to one's rightful place. Um, Halakha also guides us in terms of dietary law. Look, the reality is that I can't eat whenever I want, whatever I want. Why? Because Judaism believes that, two different ways of looking at life. Do we eat to live, or do we live to eat? Many people live to eat. They're just thinking about their next meal. Judaism says that eating is there to elevate us. Mindful eating, making a blessing before I eat, thinking about it, actually not only fills my stomach more, but actually gives me a sense that I'm here for a higher purpose. That's a really important guidepost for us. Another one, I'll give you an example, is, the rhythm of blessings. I make a blessing when I hear thunder. I make a blessing when I see lightning. I make a blessing when I see a rainbow. I make a blessing after I leave the bathroom, believe it or not, Chris. Did you know that? After you go to the bathroom, you make a blessing.
Did not know that.
Well, I'll tell you why. I once had a kidney stone. You ever had a kidney stone before?
Thankfully, no.
Okay. Well, it's really painful. And now one little thing can wreak havoc. But when it actually passes, you feel tremendous. So Judaism says, be grateful every time you go to the bathroom. So when I leave the bathroom, I make the following blessing. I say, thank you, God, for what is open, and what is closed, and everything is working properly. And now I'm inspired because I don't take that for granted. That's the way it guides me. I think your producer is going to start doing that. I can tell. You're going to start doing your blessing like that.
I'm going to have to go back to the recording and play it so I can learn it and keep it in my head as well.
Please
Can't have a
do.
kidney stone. Uh, uh, Rabbi, Judaism is obviously practiced in many forms, from Orthodox to Reform and Conservative. What are the differences between these movements, and how do they coexist within the broader Jewish community?
So I think that, one of the challenges as a person of faith is, how do I marry my faith to the modern world? Many people might actually diminish their faith so that they can just be engaged in everything in the modern world. The danger of that is that we lose our tenets of what faith is all about. On the other hand, if we are, again, isolated and not engaged, Judaism's goal is to have an impact on the world around us. So when you think about orthodoxy, I'm a modern Orthodox rabbi. One of the questions is, do you modify the times to the Torah, which is faith, or do you modify the Torah to fit the times? In a more traditional viewpoint like mine, the Torah, God's word, is eternal. And I have to figure out, how do I keep God's word in the year 2024 like I did in the year 1924 or the 1500s. In the Reform movement, they say, look, the Torah was actually inspired by God. It's man-made. We can keep the general principles, but we're not bound by those same principles. I actually believe that in a world that is unmoored, in a world that is very unanchored, modern orthodoxy, which seeks to synthesize the traditional values of Torah with the modern world, is a wonderful path to lead life because it enables me to engage in the modern world. I can be an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, a podcast host, whatever it is, but I'm still rooted in my faith and I can literally live in two worlds. That was a push. That was a plug for you, by the way.
Appreciate that. Checks in the mail. So, Rabbi, let's talk about your path to the rabbinate. Were you always pointing that direction from childhood, or was it a choice you made later on?
So look, when I was born in Albert Einstein Hospital. The first words that I said when I opened up my eyes were, "I want to be a rabbi." Just kidding. No, I never. No, but in all seriousness, I grew up in a home in Atlanta. My father is a rabbi and a Jewish educator, but more importantly, both my mother and father were deeply committed to Jewish faith, but they also raised me in a home that was pulsating with positive Jewish values. I had a strong sense of the tradition. I had a strong sense we would welcome people into our home. A big value in Judaism is hospitality. If somebody, for example, needed a place for the Sabbath, they would come into our home. And it was filled with joy, responsibility, and I have vivid memories of that. Like I always say that I don't remember a lot of what my parents told me, but the memories are very strong. So when I was in high school and going into college, I felt a strong sense of Jewish responsibility and kind of knew that I wanted to deepen my understanding of Judaism. But it was really only in college when somebody invited me to participate in helping Jewish youth, ironically, actually in the New England area, that I felt that I had a passion for getting involved in Jewish communal work. And really, my first job, I was getting ordination, and I wasn't sure. I got involved in Jewish education, teaching seventh and eighth graders at a Jewish day school. Simultaneously, I was involved as a rabbinic intern at a synagogue in West Orange, New Jersey. And I just felt like I gravitated towards synagogue life. I enjoyed it a lot. And that kind of led me on the path. So it wasn't a specific epiphany, but it was over time. I had wonderful role models, both at home and people that believed in me. I remember a young person came to me who was probably 5 years older than me and said, "You're really good at doing that. Like you really excel at doing Jewish outreach work." And over time, that I grabbed. And look, my wife is my anchor, Diane. We've been married for thank God 34 years, and she's a soulmate and has a similar passion for helping the Jewish people.
You're obviously a very joyous and passionate person. Where does that wellspring of joy, confidence, and passion come from? Has it always been with you, or is it something you had to learn over time?
I mean, my mother, blessed memory, who died many years ago, she was very upbeat. When people would ask her how she was doing, first of all, I didn't understand this reference. I'm the oldest of six. So when people would call the house and it was crazy, she would say, "Hello, Grand Central Station," because the house was chaotic. And they would ask her how she was doing, and she would say, "Thank God, fantastic." A very grateful, very upbeat person. And my father also, like, always saying the words "thank God," and I think that's part of where it came from. I also, grew up actually. My father was a big proponent of motivational speakers. Big Zig Ziglar fan, by the way. Fantastic. Your attitude determines your altitude. Like he's Mr. Positive. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. I kind of grew up on that stuff. And the other thing is, over time, I got more in touch with Jewish mystical thought. And I'll give you a story that I live with a lot. It's a fellow who was 94 years old, Italian man. He was sick with COVID in the summer of 2000. He was on a ventilator for a number of months. Finally, he got off the ventilator. He got better. And on his way out of the hospital, they gave him a bill for one day's use of a ventilator. It was like $5,000, whatever the currency was. And as he was leaving, he began to cry. And the doctor said to him, Are you crying because you don't have enough money to pay for the bill? And he said, I have enough money to pay for the bill, but I've been breathing God's air for free for 94 years. And now I know how much one day's breath is worth. And I believe in my heart of hearts that every day that God invests me with breath is a gift. And if that's a gift, my gift back to God is what I do with the gift of life. And you can't be sad. You got to be joyous. This is a tremendous gift. So I live with that. I think about it a lot. And that also definitely lifts me up every day.
We've talked about it earlier in the show. The first book you wrote is titled, What Will They Say About You When You Are Gone? Creating a Life of Legacy. And you've devoted much of your career to helping others go about creating lives of legacy. How do you define legacy, and what does it mean to lead a life focused on leaving a legacy?
So, the premise of the book, just to go back a little bit, is that you're at a funeral. And as you walk out of the funeral, you have a moment when you say to yourself, I hope they speak about me the way they spoke about that individual. And generally, you're motivated for about 15 minutes to think about what's important. And then you go back to life as usual. But life is not meant to be a highlight film. And in the book, I help people identify what is the best version of yourself. For example, if you have 5 words that you want to be remembered by, what are they? What are the things in your life that are worth fighting for? Then I take people on a journey of 7 principles to reverse engineer your life so you lead the life now for how you want to be remembered. Because everybody can lead a life of legacy, but there's no atheist in a foxhole. And in those moments of crisis, we all get serious. But imagine if every day and every hour we tapped into the highest frequency of living and really did our utmost to lead the lives now for how we want to be remembered.
You've developed a program called the Legacy Academy, which takes the principles from your book to help families have intergenerational conversations around what legacy means to them. Would you share more information about the Legacy Academy, including when the next session begins, and how can people in our audience enroll?
Sure. So the idea behind the Legacy Academy is rather than just have people read the book, I developed really a pathway for people to very intentionally try to lead a life that reflects the best version of themselves. So it's a 10-month course, and each month you focus on one of the principles. And I'll give you an example. One of the ones I quoted before is called the Elijah moment. The Elijah moment, imagine you're at a funeral and there's somebody who's there. I call it the standing room only phenomenon, which is there's somebody who's at the funeral. If you could ask the deceased who that person was, they wouldn't know. Nobody knows who they are. But that individual is there because of one moment in time, the deceased made a difference in that person's life. And I call it the Elijah moment based upon a beautiful story. By the way, Chris, have you ever seen Elijah before? You ever seen Elijah?
I have not.
So Elijah is a prophet who shows up at important moments. And there's a well-known story about a person who goes to a mystic and says, I want to see Elijah the prophet. So the mystic says to him, go into the forest. There's a widow there. Bring food for the weekend. You'll see Elijah the prophet. So the person goes into the forest. He sees the widow, the children, and he's there Friday night. He's there Saturday. Sunday morning comes. He still hasn't seen Elijah. So he goes back to the mystic and said, you promised me I would see Elijah the prophet. So the mystic says to him, go back next week, bring the food. This week you'll see Elijah the prophet. So it's Friday afternoon. He goes deep into the forest and he overhears a young child crying out to the mother. And the young child says to the mother, where are we going to get food from for this Sabbath? And the mother turns to the child and says, just like Elijah came last week, Elijah's going to come again. And it's in that moment that he realizes that he is the Elijah that this woman is waiting for. Discovering your Elijah moment means that we're not obligated to change the world, but we can each change the world of one person every day. Mark Twain said the 2 most important days of your life are the day when you're born and the day when you understand why. So I believe that every one of us can cultivate more Elijah moments in our life. And that means anticipating acts of kindness, finding ways to make a difference in somebody's life. So in the Legacy Academy, we spend a month through a video consultation, helping people become intuitively motivated that in any encounter you have, you will find a way to leave that person feeling better about themselves than before they met you. So I'm a big believer that we all have the capacity to lead better lives, and people can learn more about the Legacy Academy. The next session starts November 1st. They can go on my website, rabbidanielcohen.com, send me an email, or look up Legacy Academy, Rabbi Daniel Cohen, and that will take you there as well. But it's been a wonderful way to help people realize the best version of themselves.
You and I had a mutual friend in the late U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman from Connecticut. He was on the advisory board of Soldier Strong, the nonprofit I co-founded, but obviously you were much closer to him. You wrote the foreword for your book. You eulogized him. That's why you're in D.C. to see the documentary about Senator Lieberman's great life. From your perspective, what were Joe Lieberman's most significant contributions to American politics?
Well, he had many. I mean, one of the things that he's most well known for is he was a bipartisan individual. He was a person who was able to work across the aisle. He never let his politics become personal. And that's something that I think is needed now more than ever. Last night, I'm in D.C. right now. We heard from one of his close friends and kindred spirits, Senator Susan Collins of Maine. And she was talking about how after 9/11, Joe Lieberman was pivotal in really helping develop the Department for Homeland Security. And everybody had their fiefdom, whether it was the CIA, the armed forces. And he did it, by the way, through the power of his personality, his charisma, his kindness. He walked with humility. He listened well. And he understood that there is more that unites us than divides us. So I think his ability to find friendships, to work across the aisle is a really important character trait. Another important character trait was the central role of faith for him. He embodied the principle that I'm not going to ask, what do I want, but what does God want of me? And that instills great humility. That gives a person an ability to really try to be principled. If you think about it, politics lends itself, unfortunately, to a lot of focus on self, on compromises that are, unfortunately, compromises of integrity. But he was a person who was a courageous person. He's the subject of one of the principles in my book called Courageous Choices. And I had a conversation with him, and this is what he said. He said the following: I do not want to be remembered for playing life safe. I want to be remembered for doing what's right. And when you think about a principled politician, Joe Lieberman lived that in spades. Finally, one other thing is that, he was a person who was deeply devoted to his family. Sometimes we live in two worlds where somebody's public life and their personal life are not one and the same. Their personal life is in shatters because they're so focused. He had a tremendously well-balanced life. His inside was like his outside. I'll just leave you one final thought. I spoke to somebody during the 2000 campaign, somebody that I know was a close friend of his, and he was speaking to one of the Secret Service agents. And this Secret Service agent had been around presidents for 30 years. And he said, there are only two politicians that I know who are authentic, because you can't fool a Secret Service agent. They see what's going on inside and outside. The two politicians that are most authentic that I know were Ronald Reagan and Joseph Lieberman. So that was a great, great compliment there.
And no surprise on those two individuals. Rabbi Daniel Cohen, thank you so much for being with us today. I know you've got a busy schedule, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
And with tomorrow being the 23rd anniversary of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, I'd like to close today's show by simply saying, Let's never forget.